Coming. My name is Paula Friedman. I am co-chair of the Brookline Neighborhood Alliance with Dan Saltzman, and we are pleased to welcome you all this evening for a discussion of 3 warrant articles. I'd like to ask you the typical housekeeping rule of please silence your phones. And I want to recognize and appreciate the 3 townwide organizations that have come together to put this evening together. The League of Women Voters, President Betsy Dewitt, Town Meeting Members Association, President George Abbott Whizzer White, and the Brookline Neighborhood Alliance, Dan Saltzman and Paula Friedman, co-chairs. Our moderator this evening is from the League of Women Voters, Margaret Bush. I discussed with Margaret a few minutes ago whether she might be related to the presidents, and she said not that she knew of. So in case you were wondering. The timekeeper this evening is Ernie Fry. Ernie, raise your hand so people know. Ernie wears 2 hats. He's representing both the League of Women Voters and TMMA. The operational words that I want to share with you about this evening is collegiality, cooperation, and collaboration. And I think that is such a wonderful model for all of us to consider townwide and nationwide. We are going to be discussing 3 warrant articles this evening. The first one will be Driscoll School funding for schematic design. And we are going to be passing out in just a minute white 3x5 cards for you to consider any questions that you might like to ask. Please jot them down, and after the presentations, we will be collecting these, sorting through them, 1 representative from each of the organizations, and giving them to the moderator to go through for presentations to the speakers. We then will be discussing articles related to the Baldwin School, and for those we will be passing out colored 3x5 cards. The color that you get doesn't matter. It's just to distinguish white is for Driscoll, colored is for Baldwin. And after the discussions, we will be collecting those. Now, I'm going to guess that some of you may have come in and already know a question that you might like to ask. So we're going to be distributing these cards now for you to have a white and a colored for you, and feel free to start writing if you know what you want to ask. You may want to hear the discussion first, and that's fine. So again, thank you very much for coming, and I'm now going to introduce Betsy Dewitt, President of League of Women Voters.
Thank you, Paula, and welcome everyone. I'm at the moment here to talk about our recently passed away president. Today was the official National Day of Mourning for President George H.W. Bush, who was born in Milton, Massachusetts in 1924, died in Houston on November 30th at age 94. Most of his adult life was spent in public service. He was elected to Congress from Houston, Texas in 1966 and served as ambassador to the United Nations from 1971 to 73. He was vice president under Ronald Reagan, 1981 to 89, and then went on to become the 41st president of the United States after defeating the former Massachusetts governor Michael Dukakis in a campaign described as vicious and dirty. During his presidency, 1989 to 93, the Berlin Wall came down and the Cold War began to wind down, although other conflicts occurred in Panama and the Persian Gulf. As president, Bush supported bipartisan tax reform, legislation to improve resources for science, math, and technology in public education, and the first NAFTA agreement. After losing his re-election campaign to Bill Clinton, he retired to Houston, but also spent summers with his family in Kennebunkport, Maine. In retirement, he worked with nonprofits to address social problems and to encourage community service and volunteerism. He also was a spokesman in favor of political civility and international harmony. Today, a state funeral was held in Washington at the National Cathedral, and I'm going to ask you now to please join me in a brief moment of silence honoring our 41st President, George H.W. Bush. And now we'll get on with our program.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dan Saltzman. I'm the co-chair of the Brookline Neighborhood Alliance. On behalf of the BNA and our co-sponsors, the League of Women Voters of Brookline and the Town Meeting Members Association, I want to welcome everyone to the Warrant Review tonight. Thanks for coming. In preparing for tonight, I logged a lot of hours on the phone, and I spoke with a lot of people, people with extraordinary experience in town matters and people who have seen a lot happen inside this building. One recurring theme really struck me. So many of us are dismayed by the negativity surrounding this issue, the issues that we're going to talk about tonight. I think a lot of people are turned off by the personal attacks. One person I spoke with said it's the worst she's ever seen, the worst ever. This is worse even, she said, than the rancor in the days of the Carlton Street footbridge, which is a pretty bold statement, I think. Someone else asked if I considered getting a police detail for the night. So one by one, nearly everyone I spoke with was truly taken aback by the vitriol. Tonight we're not going to have that. These events have always been civil here at the BNA. And you know, the irony here is that we're discussing schools and kids, and that shouldn't be lost. So we are the adults in the room, as we all know. We don't have to agree. We have to be civil. We have to listen to each other, and we should understand how personal this issue is. This issue invokes our families. Where are my kids going to go to school? Are they going to walk? Will they be with their neighbors? Will they get the attention that we so desperately want for our kids? Will they get the education that we expect? This issue involves money, lots and lots of money, as we all know. We're talking nearly $500 million when you add all the possibilities and permutations of it all. That's real money. That's not a joke. This issue involves the environment. Will we bus our kids to school? What about the school's carbon footprint? Green space, parks. Do the environmental issues trump the other issues? And we've been at this issue for years. We have years invested in our ideas. We're tired, and we're kind of done with it all, I think. I heard that a lot in the phone calls that I made. People are done with it. They want to move on. So this is not exactly a recipe for civility. So what do? We need to remember that everyone has their heartfelt viewpoint. We might not like every viewpoint, but the viewpoint is theirs and it's valid for them. For all the reasons cited a minute ago, everybody can find something deeply personal about this issue. Everyone can, and it is personal. We don't have to like it. We do have to respect it, though. Unrelated to the work that I do on town issues, I'm also part of a group of people that builds bridges between the political parties. We're not trying to get people to agree necessarily. We're just trying to get people to talk, to be civil. And we've recently begun working with a similar national group called Better Angels. Now, the name is a reference to Abraham Lincoln's first inaugural address. It was delivered on the eve of the Civil War, and it was written in the spirit of reconciliation. I'm going to quote Lincoln here in the final sentence of his inaugural address. He said, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic chords of memory may swell, when again touched, as surely they will be, by our better angels of our nature." We must embrace the better angels of our nature, and we can start that tonight. Now, I'm just going to add one other thing here from President Bush because of what's happened. I thought it appropriate to read the conclusion of his short note that he left to President Clinton, and you might have seen this on the news. It's gone around. This was 132 years after Lincoln, and it was also on the day of inauguration, and he wrote, this is in a short little note to Bill Clinton, he said, "You will be our president." He underlined the word "our." "You will be our president when you read this note, and I wish you well. I wish your family well. Your successes are now our country's successes. I am rooting hard for you." I think at some point, we're going to need to root hard for the schools. Doesn't matter what decision is made in the end. We're going to have to root for the decision that's made. I should also note, in the spirit of unity and civility, I just quoted not one, but 2 Republican presidents here in Brookline Town Hall. I think that has to be some kind of a record. So definitely a nod towards civility. Now, I'm happy to begin the night, and I'm just going to ask Betsy to come back up, and she's going to talk about the procedural aspect of what happened last night.
Well, I gather the advisory committee meeting ran so late that there was some confusion as to whether the vote took place yesterday or today. Anyway, I'm going to give you a brief update. There was an amendment to Article 3 voted by the full advisory committee. And I can read the text of that to you, and then I'm going to tell you what the moderator has said, how he will manage this procedurally at town meeting. The advisory committee voted that the town reappropriate and release for expenditure the $1.5 million appropriated under Section 13, Special Appropriation Number 65 of Article 7 of the 2018 Annual Town Meeting, as provided in said appropriation for plans to address and remediate substandard pedagogical and common spaces in the Baker, Heath, Lawrence, Lincoln, and Runkle schools. Such plans to be consistent with the goal of maintaining Brookline's neighborhood schools. So this is the advisory committee amendment that will be put before town meeting. The moderator has said that he will consider Articles 3 and 4 and the proposed amendment together. He has many speakers signed up already for Articles 3 and 4, and he is encouraging anyone who now wishes to sign up and speak on behalf or against the advisory committee's amendment to come forward, and he will consider them, and then I think he's going to try to negotiate balance from the number of bodies and time. But what he did say is that he will plan to have a full debate that will cover the subject matter of Article 3 and of the proposed amendment. And then subsequently, there will be a separate discussion of Article 4, which is a separate article which only deals with the purchase of land. So in the town meeting, the vote on the amendment proposed by the advisory committee, should that pass, the amendment will become the main motion, and the actual substance of Article 3 will not be voted. If the amendment fails, then the town meeting will go forward and vote on the substance of Article 3. So I just want to give people a little bit of an understanding of what will come forward. When this discussion forum was being organized, we didn't have this information, and so the speakers have not been asked to address this new amendment, although the content of it will be explained. So that's just to give you a little bit of additional information before we get started. Oh, and now our moderator will take over and we'll begin the program. Ms. Bush, come forward.
All right. We have a lot to hear about this evening. Just before we do that, I have a quick lost and found announcement. We have a laptop computer that was found in a chair and is up here if anyone is missing that item. Tonight we're going to begin with Driscoll School. And with each of our sets of speakers, we have two who are speaking. So tonight we're going to begin with Neil Wyszynski representing the Select Board and with David Bollock representing the School Committee. We need to remind you that the speakers have a lot to tell us and they are on a tight schedule. And many of you will be turning in questions to us. Please do two things. Write very clearly on those cards and be very succinct. We know that some of you have important things that you want to say to the audience and to the speakers, but keep it very brief and very succinct on those cards. As they take up your questions, they are each only going to have 2 minutes to speak. So they have to handle this very efficiently, and we ask you to do the same thing. So if you've scrawled a whole lot on your card, would you ask for another card? Start over. And now we're going to begin with our 2 speakers.
And of course, that could change, the procedural stuff can change if the advisory committee changes its motion. Dan, can you get me started?
Is it this one?
No. So for everyone who doesn't know me, I'm Neil Wyshynski. I'm chair of the select board, and I'll be taking the lead on talking about Driscoll, and if I flub or say something stupid, David Pollock, the chair of the school committee, will save me. And we're having some technical difficulties. So what you're going to hear tonight is 2 parts of a 3-part solution to the townwide school capacity crisis. And the 3 parts are an expansion of the Driscoll School, expansion and renovation of the Driscoll School, and there we're getting 8 new classrooms. In the second part of the program, you're going to be hearing about the Baldwin School, and the plan there is to get 27 plus a few other classrooms. 18. No, it's 18. It's 2 sections, right? 2 sections plus, so it's 18 classrooms, and then an expansion and or renovation of the Pierce School with the number of classrooms to be determined through an MSBA process. So we are applying to the Massachusetts School Building Authority on the Pierce School, and we are wedded to their schedule. And no matter what happens at town meeting, Okay. So here's the 3-part solution. And what we're asking you to do is fund the schematic design phase. And we've been through the feasibility design phase, which talks in generalities about the project. It gives us the basic footprint and height, the number of classrooms. Can we fit a school in the location? Some basic drawings, some analysis on traffic and parking, and starts thinking about swing space. In the next phase, called schematic design, and this is for both projects, we'll be getting into a lot more detail. We'll be getting into the design of the buildings, starting to talk about what are these buildings really going to look like. In feasibility, we're not talking about architectural design, we're talking about massing. But in the next phase, we'll be talking about architectural design. We'll be getting detailed sketches, the exact layout of outdoor play spaces, more detail on the traffic and parking, and also, most importantly, one of the main goals of the schematic design is to start getting the number that we would be putting on the ballot and the promise to the voters that this is how much it's going to cost. And that's one of the main outcomes of schematic design. And here's a statement of the problem showing the enrollment growth since 2005. And what this shows, if you look at the colored, the schools that the boxes are in color, and you add them up for Driscoll, Heath, Lincoln, and Runkle, that's the amount of additional students we have today versus 2005, the equivalent of 4 schools that we've crammed into our existing spaces. And our existing spaces have been carved up. Some kids are learning in converted closets, locker rooms, hallways, and in some of the schools, the situation is pretty appalling. You're going to be seeing more information in the Baldwin section, I'm sure, about the enrollment projections, and these have been revised, so I'm not going to talk about that, and I'm not really qualified to talk about that. But let's move on, because there'll be a lot of talk about that in the next section, and talk about some of the Driscoll-specific challenges. And at Driscoll, for those of you who've been in Driscoll, you go in, the building it's clean, it's nice, but it feels like an old school. It feels like it needs renovation, and it's also very overcrowded. We have an undersized auditorium. The science classrooms are inadequate. The outdoor play spaces are inadequate, poorly organized. And the field at Driscoll is out of commission much of the time due to wet conditions. The heating system is on its last legs, and as a matter of fact, it was scheduled to be replaced, and because now Driscoll is scheduled to be renovated and expanded, we have put the Driscoll HVAC project on hold, and we are crossing our fingers and hoping that the system will last another couple of winters. The custodial space is too small, the nursing area is too small, and then there are parking and drop-off challenges. Here are some pictures with examples of some of the inadequate spaces. In the upper left, students with disabilities are learning with multiple children in a very tight classroom, being taught simultaneously, which shouldn't be happening. On the right, there's literacy intervention in the hallways, medical equipment, lower left in the hallways, and then the copy area is at the top of a stairway. These are just some examples of some of the issues at Driscoll. So what the proposal is that you're going to be voting on is a 4-section school. 4-section, that means 4 classes in each grade. And currently we're at what, 3.5 per grade?
I think that the enrollment is 620, and
we're
which is
going up to-
significantly above, but it should be for a 3-section per grade school.
Right, and the proposal here is to go up to 800. We'll be bringing BEEP back into Driscoll with adequate special education spaces, English learner education spaces, and with a total of 36 core classrooms, staffing of 125 people, which is staff members, which is up 18. And the size is 155,000 square feet, an increase of about 57,000. So it's about a 1/3, 1/2 increase in size. Is that right? Yeah. So it's a pretty significant expansion. So we started when we started out. We started out looking at different options, and if you look at the option in the top right. Top left, I'm sorry, what's called option 0. This is taking the existing school and just adding an addition to the right and just doing what we call a code renovation. And what we found was, in so doing, we would still have many inadequate spaces, and we weren't getting really a 21st century school, but maybe we could have lived with that except for the cost. The cost was in the $60 to $70 million range, which got us thinking, for how much more can we fix the problems? So we started looking at some additional options. So if you look at option A1 on the right, that's a more than code renovation, but expansion of the existing building on the left side, and then an expansion on the right. So it's using the existing building footprint and the existing structure, but fixing the problems. And we found there, we were hitting $90 million working with the existing building. I'll show you the numbers in a moment. Another thing that wasn't happening by using the existing footprint was we weren't increasing the amount of green space. So one of the charges to the building committee was, okay, is there a way to, even though we're getting more kids, have either the same or an increased amount of open space per, really? Yes. Gosh, good Lord. So the option we chose is a tear-down option, which actually is the same money as the renovation option. And this option fixes a lot of problems. It moves the school to the more commercial side of the site, and then the neighborhood is getting a whole new park oriented towards the neighborhood. Just some more views of this. This is a kind of looking down, and I'm being told to stop. And I'll just show one more slide. Even though the building is 50% larger, this is a section showing the height of the existing building from Westbourne Terrace. That's the rectangle on the left, the height. Now on the right, it shows you the height of the existing building. So even though we have a much bigger building on Westbourne Terrace, the profile is lower than the existing building. So we're getting 21st century school. We're getting a lot more space. We're reorienting the school more towards the commercial area. The residential area is getting a park, and I am in awe of this plan. So, yeah.
What was the cost again?
Here we go. 193 to 105 million, and the delta will depend on how much parking is provided under the building. Okay. So I guess we'll answer questions. What? Can we just leave the slide with you? Go. And I'll go back.
White cards and white cards. We have four.
There we go.
What Driscoll cards are nice? White cards. Driscoll cards.
David, did you want to add to this?
No, I'm here to, I just can answer questions.
He's
and
my
back-
appendage.
Yeah, to back Neil up. Each of the building committees is co-chaired by a member of the school committee and a member of the select board. And the Driscoll building committee, the school committee member who co-chairs with Neil is Susan Wolf-Ditkoff,
Okay.
not me. So she's the expert who was available tonight, but having been the
All right.
chair of capital subcommittee of the school committee for many years, I'm knowledgeable about all the
All right,
projects.
thank you. We need to mention that tonight, the presentation is actually being videotaped by Big Access TV. So we have people watching at home who don't get to ask their questions in person, but probably share many of the questions coming up here. A question that we have that should be, we hope, simple to answer. Will plans be considered for Driscoll that do not include demolishing the historic existing building?
We did consider that, and that was options 0 and A1. And the option that was selected is the option you see here. So the answer is yes, we considered it, and this is the option that we selected.
And probably the most significant reason that this one was favored by the building committee and recommended by the building committee to the select board and school committee was because this option actually increases the amount of outdoor play space by 50%, from 72,000 square feet of outdoor play space to 109,000 square feet of outdoor play space.
Okay. We have a question about the architect. Will the architect do the same, the study for both Driscoll and Baldwin?
Yes, it's the same architect.
Okay. And will his firm be hired to do full design documents?
I believe so, yeah. He's already been hired and it's in his scope. So if this is funded, it's all in place and we can start immediately with design.
We have interesting questions that relate to transportation and
Sure.
parking.
If I can answer.
Always a big concern in Brookline. The question is a little long, and it goes like this. Are you aware of the transportation demand management study done for the town that shows that 76% of Driscoll school employees drive alone to work? Will the town commit to implementing and managing a strong TDM program with reduced parking at Driscoll?
So the town has been working on a transportation demand management plan to reduce reliance on cars by town staff, all town staff, town and school staff, has been moving towards implementation for actually a number of years. It's been going quite slowly, in my opinion.
Too slowly, in my opinion.
Right. And an initial study was completed, and then monies were appropriated by town meeting to put forward the implementation plan in this year, in this funding cycle, and that work is in the hands of the Transportation Department and the Select Board.
Right, and that's ongoing, and I don't know the exact status, but the answer is yes, we're committed to it, and part of it will be dealt with in collective bargaining with our employees.
We have questions that are related to some other buildings that in the school system. What year was the Driscoll last renovated, and why wasn't the Pierce School renovated first? What year was the Pierce last renovated?
So what's sort of important about both Pierce and Driscoll is neither has ever had a major renovation. Neither has ever had a whole, like, end-to-end renovation, period. Certainly that's true of Pierce, and at Driscoll it's also true, but Driscoll was obviously built in a number of different eras. But on the other hand, Brookline, for the last, I think, 20 years, because I hear, because it was before my time, that it didn't do a great job of maintaining its buildings and investing in its buildings, and that was costly, but that was corrected or started, that was reset in the 90s. And since then, it has done a very good job of capital planning and capital investment in its buildings. So there has been significant ongoing new electrical systems, windows, roofs, all that kind of stuff on both buildings. But and there's been a lot of investment in Pierce, in those systems, and in Driscoll. The cafeteria, so in the early 2000s, there was an elevator done at Driscoll, and so it's lots of little projects, never a major renovation for either.
Okay. Another question about a building. Could you tell us what impact the new BEEP building on Harvard will have on the need for in-school BEEP classrooms?
So it's really going to replace the BEEP facility at Temple Ohabe Shalom on Beacon Street. So it's really the same number of classrooms, and then in addition, it's going to have offices and the intake center for students, and that facility is now in rental space down on Webster Place across the street from here. So the town's paying rental to house all of the BEEP administrators, and then the intake is actually at Temple Emeth down in South Brookline. So it'll consolidate those offices and get us out of some rentals, and then it'll get us out of the rental on Beacon Street, but it won't actually move us towards getting BEEP classrooms. It won't change the current situation where we've had to pull them out of all the K-8 schools, except for 3 classrooms in two buildings.
A question has to do with the number of classrooms and size of Driscoll. Which set of numbers is the basis for the number of classrooms and size of Driscoll? If the school committee has revised its numbers downward in enrollment projections.
It seems, I'm not sure what the question is. I mean, the plan, just speaking about what Driscoll is, the Driscoll project, this building and the proposal that's asking for funding, Warrant Article 2 next Thursday, is to build a school for 800 students. That's 754, not exactly, but 36 classrooms K-8 and 3 early education classrooms, approximately 800 students. It's a 154,000 square foot building. The enrollment projections are just the annual look at how many students we think will be enrolled in the schools next year and the year after that and the year after that and the year after that. So that's a educated guess, a projection of how many students we will have in the whole, all of Brookline showing up. So it's not related to, I mean, it's not the same number as the number of classrooms. Here, this is a 4-section per grade school, 36 classes, and 3 early education classes.
Okay. As someone who is out on the streets a lot in Brookline, it's certainly evident that we have a great many babies and young children in Brookline. So these questions about numbers of classrooms are apt to trouble us, I think, for a very long time. No matter how big we make these schools, it would seem, as you're out and about in Brookline. There's a question that may be our last question. What is the cost of per structured parking space? This is back to the parking issue.
I don't.
We have it depends on how you build it. If it's under a building, if it's under a playing field, there's a variability, and it's not precise at this stage because we're still in the concept stage, the feasibility stage. However, for this stage, the cost per parking space for structured parking that the architects provided us, and which is baked into the cost estimates here, is at $180,000 per parking space. So 10 spaces, $1.8 million. You can do the math, and it's all there in the in the 2 numbers for the cost estimate that you saw, which was the
93 to 105 million.
Without structured parking, and 105 with lots of structured parking. And the reason that we don't know whether it's none, some, more, or lots is because in addition to the transportation demand management, which, once we implement that plan town-wide, we should be able to reduce the number of cars that all of our staff need to park across town. The consultant, Howard Stein Hudson, that did the initial plan, said that pretty much the entry level of implementation of transportation demand management, if you just do the first steps, but you have to fund them, it costs some money, but you should be able to, and their experience with other communities and other businesses is that this first step is a reduction of 10% in parking demand. So we have townwide, including the schools and everybody else, nearly a couple thousand employees. And so even a 10% reduction is a lot less parking in town.
Right.
So the other piece in addition to that is that all of our schools, including the high school and BEEP, have parking plans where some of the teachers have dashboard permits, and instead of parking in a garage or something, they're distributed so each street has a number of teachers, and they only park on that street. You park on, might be Westbourne Terrace or Lancaster Terrace or Mason Terrace or Salisbury Road or whatever for Driscoll, and then the teachers, some of them park on the streets, which is a parking space that we already all pay for. We've built it, we maintain it, we plow it, we pay for it, and so we're using it park a teacher from 7 in the morning until they go home, and then how much of that parking is there versus how much do we buy under this building, and that conversation will happen in the schematic phase, and it will happen very much at Transportation Board that meets in this room, as well as at the building committee level. But it hasn't been decided, there'll be public input.
Okay. There's a question that seems related to what you've just said. Will the new Driscoll be a net zero footprint building? If so, does that include transportation?
Well, the goal is for it to be a net zero. And there's actually, the advisory committee motion says that we can't even study anything other than non-fossil fuel. I think the select board believes that's going a little too far. We have to really understand the costs and the trade-offs. In your combined reports will be a statement of our goals and how we hope to implement it. It's my hope that we will be able to do this non-fossil fuel. But no, we have not considered the cars that are coming, teacher cars parking there.
But I think we as a community could embrace the idea of electric school buses. And so that's something we could do. I don't know that we're going to tell all people in Brookline that if they want to stay here, they have to get a Chevy Volt or a Tesla. I'm not sure we'll go that far.
I just bought a Volt.
Well, there you go. Right, so maybe we'll all do it on our own. We can all opt in, as I have, to green electricity for our house. And just on the motion from advisory, they did carve out for an emergency generator that you could have a fossil fuel for an emergency generator because it won't generate electricity if the grid goes down, so you can't do that. And then I was at Climate Action's Net Zero meeting this morning, and someone on that committee raised the question about whether we've talked to the cooks in the lunchroom and whether they're ready to give up their gas ranges. And so there are some conversations that need to happen as we move away from fossil fuels.
Right.
We have a question that goes back to the shape. Oh, we've come to the end. We need to, our timekeeper says no more questions.
Thank you all.
But we're almost at the end of those anyway. But thank you very much to David and to Neil. We will have now two sets of speakers speaking about the Baldwin School. And the first two speakers, again, will come from the Select Board and the School Committee. This time, we're going to have Bernard Green speaking from the Select Board. And we will have, I'm seeing, and the first two speakers, I'm sorry, they put up four, that got a little confusing. Okay. The first two people who will speak will actually be the Select Board member, Bernard Green, and School Committee member, Julie Schreiner Oldham. When they have finished, we will introduce two more speakers who will bring different points of view to this. And which of you is going to go first?
Julie.
I am. Do you want them to join us up here?
Go ahead, Julie.
Sure. Good evening. I'm Julie Schreiner Oldham. I'm one of the school committee members. I am also one of the co-chairs of the Baldwin School Building Committee. And tonight we are here. I actually want to take us back. So I joined school committee in January of 2017. And at one of my very first meetings, Superintendent Bott discussed, in February of 2017, he presented to the school committee a memo, and in that memo he said, the need for a new elementary school results from the unprecedented enrollment growth experienced in Brookline over the past 11 years. Without any additional enrollment growth, the need for a ninth elementary school is clear. Then we're going to fast forward a little bit to June 6th of 2018. At that presentation that was given before the school committee, the select board, and an ad hoc subcommittee of advisory, there was another presentation given by the superintendent. In that presentation, he identified, he was talking about the challenges that we had in the system. And he was looking to identify a single or multi-site solution to address the historic and ongoing enrollment growth, which since 2015 we have absorbed the equivalent of 3 K-8 schools into our existing schools through Expand in Place. Every school is overcrowded and needs relief in some way. Now, at that presentation, we were also shown enrollment projections. And we have here this actual slide that was given in the presentation in June of 2000, in this past June, actually. And you see the enrollment starting in 2012. It's down 5,067, and then projected to go up to 5,856 in the year 2021, and now we're actually looking at opening the building in 2022. Now this year we've heard a lot about, in the recent month, we've heard a lot about how the whole world has changed, and our whole view about this project and the need for the school has completely changed, which is why I'm taking us back to where we were and what we were told and what we discussed at that meeting in June when we decided how to move forward. In that presentation, we were shown this slide. Now, there was a math mistake that was made in the enrollment projections that led to this slide. And so we've shown here an adjustment with the corrected projections of where the slide should have been. So we see we're at 5,067. We go forward to 2021, 2022. In June, our understanding was that the projection was 5,856. We now know that the correct projection should have been 5,716. So what decisions were made based off of those projections that were shown to us by the superintendent? On June 13, 2018, the Select Board and School Committee made the decision to move forward with a 3-site solution. That was Driscoll, Baldwin, and Pierce with MSBA funding. And so as we look further at the projection enrollments, now we have, fast forwarding to now, there have been 2018 K-8 enrollment projections. And according to those projections, in FY24, enrollment will still be 1,400 students more than it was in 2006. And in 2029, enrollment will still be 1,080 students more than it was in 2006. Something else that's important to note about the enrollment projections is that as we look forward, we only include projections from known developments. So for the other things, and those projections are conservative. So things can change, and as other projects come on board, those children will also come into our school system, although those are not included in the projections. So some of the townwide challenges are shown here, but I'll pass through so that we have a chance to look at our solution. So here are some more pictures that we see throughout the district. This is Baldwin at a glance. It would house 450 students. That's two sections of K-8, 3 classes of pre-K, and 3 classrooms for RISE. We have our design. So the designs that were recommended by the school building committee, it's called Solar Harvest, which takes the most advantage of the sun and daylighting that can be provided of that. Here's an interior screenshot of what that would look like. And as we discussed earlier, these are at the feasibility stage, so they just show massing. They're not all of the details. The cost for the Baldwin School, with 10 below-grade parking spaces, it would be $72 to $76 million. With 40 below-grade parking spaces, that would be $78 to $82 million. So at 450 seats, that's a cost of $182,000 per seat. Now, if we take a look at the property, we have the Baldwin School property at the top. That's approximately 1.2 acres. Then we have the Baldwin School playground below. And if you look over to the left, we have that's the 3 condos that we talk about. That's Oak Street. Now, the Select Board has entered into a offer of purchase with the 3 owners of those condos, and I'm going to show you some options of what we could do with that land if we were able to acquire, if it's approved at town meeting next week. It could provide 8,600 square feet of additional play space. It could also be used for 17 parking spaces on the ground level, and then 3 stories or 2 stories, depending on what the building committee were to decide, of massing above it. Now, something that we have asked the architect, these are preliminary studies and preliminary drawings. If the land were acquired, then we would look at this in further detail. We've asked him to make sure that we maintain access to the Baldwin School playground. Some of the benefits is that it could reduce structured parking. It reduces ledge excavation. It enhances the school playground access, school access during the day. It also provides additional safety equipment turnaround, and it also allows for turnaround of cars in different ways and greater building flexibility. And then one of the real primary benefits of it is it allows the reduction of the height from the front views of the building. So now this picture is drawn as if we're standing on Heath Street looking at the Baldwin School. That would be the main entrance. This is without the acquisition of the Oak Street property. And then if we were able to acquire that land, as I was talking about, you have those parking spaces and the access underneath, and then that massing that would be allowed to be above it, and it reduces the height and reduces the visual impact on the neighborhood surrounding. So that's where we are. Bernard, did you want to add anything that I didn't cover in the presentation?
Sure, I'll add a couple of things.
Sure.
I'm a 20th century guy, so I don't have fancy slides to talk from. But I wanted to just add a couple things that relate to some of the issues circulating around town regarding the Baldwin project. Last night at the Select Board, we issued a statement on fossil fuel-free school building projects, expressing the Select Board's commitment to supporting environmentally sustainable future school buildings. The projects that will most immediately reflect that commitment will be the Driscoll and Baldwin School projects. Both, as Select Board Member Wyszynski indicated, we are seeking to make sure that those projects are, among other things, fossil fuel free to the extent we can do that. Both of these projects are essential parts of a 3-school solution that solves, as was discussed by Julie earlier, 2 problems. Number one, the past enrollment growth in the schools, which even though it is not as high as anticipated earlier, still is a significant problem that we have to solve. And the response to which previously has been what I consider unsatisfactory so-called expand in place strategies. And secondly, the expected continuing problem of currently schools that have too many children in them, and with the result that we have undersized common spaces, children placed in learning spaces that are just not appropriate for their needs. And as the recent complaint filed with the Department of Secondary Education and the Department of Justice indicates, that is having a major impact on our most vulnerable kids, particularly kids with disabilities. And that is not something that we can sort of turn our back on or ignore. Last night at the advisory committee, as was discussed earlier, the advisory committee voted on a alternative plan in the form of an amendment in substitution for Warrant Article 3 for the Baldwin School. I think that this is a very troubling amendment. It just puts off the day of reckoning in terms of our enrollment needs, and using the $1.5 million appropriated already for the Baldwin Schematic Design process to, and it's not clear, but either planning for or actually remediating substandard conditions in 5 schools, surprisingly not including Pierce. If that amendment passes, which will put us, if that amendment passes, the question is, where do we put the students that are in these substandard spaces, among other things? As a practical matter, we may be forced to use Old Lincoln and Old Baldwin. And I mention that because those are schools built deep into the 20th century. They're old, they're inefficient, and in particular, they are not environmentally sustainable. That's one of the consequences of this amendment in particular, or any other act that results in not building Baldwin, which is an essential piece of the three-school solution. Baldwin gives us the amount of classroom spaces we need to really solve the problem. Driscoll and Pierce, while helpful, is not going to provide enough classroom space to really make a dent in these problems that we now see we cannot avoid because of this complaint, among other reasons. There are many other consequences that we discussed last night at the Select Board meeting that I just want to throw out to sort of provoke discussion and maybe some questions that we can respond to. We need the additional space, and if we don't pass the 3-school plan, our undersized gyms, cafeterias, and auditoriums and substandard learning spaces will continue to be a problem. And let me just, sort of personal point of view, talk about one substandard space I saw at the Driscoll School. It was a utility closet that had been divided up into 4 spaces for guidance and other purposes. To the side was an area that was used for guidance. I don't know the details of what else it's used for, but when we were there was a child behind a curtain talking to a guidance counselor. It wasn't an intense session or anything, but we could clearly hear that conversation, which should have been private, behind a curtain. I found that kind of shocking, and in the complaint, this is discussed as one of the issues that the parents of children with disabilities cite as really problematic. I see it. Really problematic in our schools, that if we don't fix, we will have to reckon with either one way or another, including sending many kids out into other school districts that have more competent learning spaces for children with disabilities. As everyone knows, that'd be a very expensive proposition. We can't really expand in place anymore. I mean, if we don't pass this 3-school solution, expand in place, I don't think is really an option anymore. I mean, how much more can you intrude into hallways with walls in order to create new spaces? How many more shower curtains can you put up in buildings to create spaces that you don't otherwise have? There are proposals for expanding Lawrence, the school in my neighborhood, a school that is next to a Article 97 park, Longwood Park. Any significant expansion of Lawrence, so far as I can tell, and I'm not a engineer or architect or anything, but it looks like it would have to intrude on that park. Another lawsuit. if we were to try something like that. And finally, I think, the main consequence, or one of the main consequences of failure to fix this problem, failure to pass the 3-school solution, is going to be the reputation of this town. And that's an intangible, but it's a very important intangible, because it really determines whether our citizens are going to be willing to continue to support, with overrides, school purposes going into the future. And it's also embarrassing for us to have situations like this. Thank you.
We also have 2 speakers who are going to give alternative perspectives to the Baldwin School situation, and we will ask them to speak. When they have spoken, we will take questions that all 4 presenters will be able to speak to, and once all the questions have been answered, the 4 will get a chance to do a brief wrap-up as well. So the next speaker is going to present us with actually an amendment to one of these, and so please welcome to the microphone John Doggett.
I went into the hospital, got plastic surgery, and here I am.
John Doggett.
Actually, yeah. Actually, John is going to introduce the amendment, and I'm just going to talk about Baldwin in general and why the Doggett Amendment, which will lead you to see why the Doggett Amendment is a good idea. I don't need to, no. I'm Richard Nangle. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 15, and I want to thank you all for allowing me to speak on behalf of not just my neighborhood, but all of Brookline. The 9th school process is unprecedented in the history of Brookline. Never before has the town continued to push a project into a precinct that was unanimously opposed by town meeting members from that precinct. Never before have the town's elected officials lobbied so directly for a major spending initiative before town meeting. Never before has the town asked town meeting members to spend millions of dollars on private real estate that they have no plan for. Never before have town officials done more to obfuscate and delay sharing critical information with town meeting members before asking for millions of dollars. There's a reason none of this has been done before. This is not how we do things in Brookline, and we shouldn't start now. As town meeting members, you are being asked to spend millions of dollars in a neighborhood that is unanimously opposed to a project. Why approve those funds when the money could be put to much better use in your own districts? The money, especially the $4.7 million to acquire private property on Oak Street at a rate of $25 million per acre, could be immediately put to use improving existing conditions at existing schools, especially for programs that are badly underserved by our schools today. On the other hand, if you want to offer to buy my house at that rate, I will sell. The insightful, independent, data-driven work of 2 advisory committee members who have long been engaged in the 9th school process has forced the school committee to acknowledge that Brookline no longer faces an enrollment crisis. In fact, the town's newly released numbers, produced in response to the independent research, show that Brookline will actually have hundreds fewer students in 10 years than we have now. The school committee responded by shifted messaging. They now claim that this has never been about enrollment, but about the need to update and modernize existing schools. By now, the repeated revelations about misinformation and behind-the-scenes scheming by the school department to build a vanity project at the Baldwin site should remove any credibility they maintain in the 9th school debate. A Baldwin school does nothing to address the critical space needs that have been spotlighted in recent days. Let's use Baldwin on the footprint that we have. It would be a fine location, for example, for the BEAT program, and we could stop paying more than $200,000 a year in rent to Temple Emeth. We could also use Baldwin for an early adaptive learning program. Just 2 weeks after the school committee's chosen architect for the Baldwin School said in a public meeting that the $4.7 million Oak Street properties were, quote, not necessary to the project, unquote, last week he outlined for the building committee why this parcel was, quote, so important, unquote, for addressing the site's myriad problems. At the 2017 town meeting members wisely voted to delay additional spending on the Baldwin site until legal questions were answered. But they remain unanswered. Now, legal action has actually been taken against the town, and the school committee is simply urging town meeting members to take them at their word that the suit won't go anywhere. It is pertinent to remember that the city of Westfield had a similar thought in 2012, only to find in 2017 that the state Supreme Judicial Court had not only blocked their attempt to build a school on protected land, but also strengthened Article 97 of the Massachusetts State Constitution beyond anyone's wildest imagination. What that means for Baldwin is a long delay in the courts and no construction, even in the best case scenario for those who support that project. We are better off walking away, spending the money on projects that are vital and can be done in real time. Let's do that and call it victory. The lawsuit is not the first reason to oppose Baldwin. It should be the last. Just last month, a major environmental report was released warning that we have 12 years to solve the climate change crisis. It was a clarion call to thinking globally and acting locally. In Brookline, we have always done that. Building a 90% commuter school is in direct contrast with our values as a community. This is an easy one, folks. Let's cast Baldwin aside and address our overcrowding issues now. We ask that we stand together for one equitable and really green Brookline. Please vote no on warrant Article 3 and 4 and support the Doggett Amendment instead. Thank you.
And now we'll have John Doggett, who is going to speak to an amendment to Article 3.
Good evening, everybody. While Dan sets up the computer here, hopefully it's not charged to my time slot, but I'm John Doggett, precinct member for Precinct 13, town meeting member Precinct 13, and advisory committee member, and also a member of the ad hoc subcommittee of the advisory committee that advised the school board and the school committee and the select board about the Baldwin decision. And what I would like to do tonight is to really give you the genesis or the background as to why I put this amendment forward to the advisory committee who voted it in favor of it last night, so that you have to understand where I'm coming from. So I think you've seen this chart before. Julie showed it to you a few minutes ago, and it basically is a very important slide because it was fundamental to our understanding of the problem at that time, in fact all the year leading up to that decision point in June 13th, which was enrollment was increasing, and you can see the chart there, the same as Julie. The only difference is I put the red line on there and pointed out that was FY22, the last number. It's important because we're going to follow that red line through the next couple of slides. So here's the actual plot of the data from that enrollment report. Basically, those are the numbers, and that's what it looked like. As you see, FY22, it was going up, but actually, if you include more up to 28, it actually sort of dipped down slightly and came back up again. This basically did mean at the time that if we put capacity in FY22, we would still need it through the next 5-8 years. That was the theory. Unfortunately, a small group of people looked at that report in significant detail. And we discovered several major flaws in the double counting flaw of 40 kindergarten students for each year, for example, old housing and old birth rate data. So what happened is that we sent a letter to the school department pointing this out, and they did respond on November 27th this year, about 8 days ago, with the new data. And this is what the new data looks like from their plot. You can see the green line is the new data with the flaws eliminated. So if we'd had that data at the time of the meeting in June, I think we may have well come up with a significantly different answer to the question, because clearly the enrollment crisis as projected there was not, in fact, the case. The data, I put the data on the slide for just to show you, but the delta, the difference between both those charts is 400 students in FY22 and 800 students, which is the size of Devotion. So, excuse me, size of Coolidge Corner School. Sorry about that. And an overestimate. So it's a significant change. I'm plotting now. What I'm like on this chart is a little bit complicated, but it's not that difficult. Let me explain it to you. I thought, well, let's take the capacity, look at the capacity. So we've taken the the blue bars there are the current capacity of using MSBA standard, taken out actually of the enrollment report for the current capacity. The green line, as you've seen before, if you just remember, let's go back there, the green line shows you how it relates to that capacity. I've added the 3 prongs up there. We've got Driscoll being added, the next line, that sort of orange color. The salmon color is Baldwin. And right at the end in FY28 is an addition of Pierce, which we hope, not touch wood, that the MSBA will partner with us and get that done. And maybe that's a date of its delivery if we're lucky. So what it shows is that the capacity that we currently have, if those projections hold, then we don't need more capacity. That's the good news. Those projections may change. Maybe that green line comes up. Maybe it needs to go, Driscoll is there as an emergency or at least a backstop capacity situation. But in general, we would like to see Driscoll used to relieve the pressure in Pierce and Lawrence in the north of Brookline. So that's how we look at the capacity. So as there is no capacity crisis, the pivot has gone on from capacity to overcrowding, which we welcome. I think that there is a huge problem in our schools, which has been there for quite some time, we've seen all the pictures, the overcrowding. So enrollment capacity is not a crisis, overcrowding is a problem, and substandard spaces are problems. They're different sorts of problems. We have common facilities, for example, cafeteria is the most obvious one, an easy example to take, which has in Lawrence, completely, they have 5 seatings there, and that's clearly an overcrowding situation. SPED, breakout areas, ELE, all of those kinds of specialized programs that need small spaces, they're inadequately served. And the solution, we believe, is localized remediation to reduce that overcrowding, i.e. a direct application of solving the problem on the ground at that school. If it's at Heath, you just solve it in Heath. If it's at Lawrence, you solve it at Lawrence. And basically, the answer is not, we believe, not a new school in a distant part of town that's going to take 4 and maybe 5 or 7. We don't know how long it's going to take to come online given the situation with the legal situation. So Baldwin cannot mitigate local problems and will create disruptive cascade redistricting. This was the substitute motion. The yellow unfortunately has come off. Basically, the amendment offer would redirect already appropriated money to support the school committee in efforts to evaluate and prioritize direct and immediate solutions to substandard spaces in specific schools and produce plans for remediation. Basically, the money is for feasibility in essence. I think there's some confusion there for Mr. Green mentioned, but the idea is there's an equal amount of money for the schools of Baker Heath, Lawrence, Lincoln, and Runkle. Driscoll is already taken care of, or will be hopefully by town meeting, and Pierce is under MSBA management, so MSBA partnership, so nothing can be done with Pierce. So that's why those 2 are missing from the list. We know a lot about the problems. Just look at the colors on this chart. It's by school: Baker, Lawrence, Ruckle, Heath, and Lincoln, and yellow and green is good. Yellow is a little worse than green, but it's pretty good. It's the orange and red areas. So this is a heat map, we call it, and you can go specifically to the classrooms that are listed under each of those and see exactly where the problems are, and basically look to where, for example, Baker and Lawrence need attention. It just jumps at you. Another chart with more facilities on it. Well, I'm going to skip over this. Just get the picture. We know where the problems are. We know how to solve them. And so I'm just going to go quickly to Heath, if I may. Yes, Heath. Just to give an example of the feasibility here. We've got, HMFH did this plan. There is that red square there, that's 12 classroom areas in that potential. So that's 26,000 square feet, roughly. That could be a RISE program. That could be solve all of the Heath small breakout problems. Just as for instance, so if rather than getting in Baldwin 6 or 7 or 8 years down the road, getting a RISE program that is adequately spaced and available to the participants, then here's an opportunity. And that is a very small addition to Heath, which is easily done. To HMFH could be considered. I'm not suggesting that that's the answer. I'm just suggesting it's a possibility of an answer that we see. And I can go through several of the other examples, which we believe is absolutely necessary. So if I come back to this slide here, the substitute motion, the time frame for addressing substandard space needs to be shortened. We can't wait, I believe, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. 2 minutes. Oh, 2 minutes. Okay, thank you. We can start now, and the idea behind the motion, the substitute motion, is to enable the school department through 1.5 million, which is basically $300,000 per school, to come up with those plans, whether that Heath plan is a good idea, whether the HMFH has one for Lawrence, whether those are good ideas and feasible today, and how much they are costing them, and coming to bring that back to town meeting. They need funding. They will be in the order of, let's have a look here, if I can find it. There it is. Okay, cost estimate. These are numbers that were provided to us by the architecture firm of JLA, actually out of the Driscoll project. So we just did a rough estimate. Those numbers, those are the schools down the left. The deficiency that Superintendent Bott has identified, those are the numbers there, 127,000 square feet total. Basically, a Heath solution there, $10.7 million potentially. 65.8 for the whole total. I think that if that was, I'm not saying that that is the answer. It gives you an indication of what of a solution, but I think that it looks like, from where I stand, that would be a far better deal than building a new school up in the Baldwin area, which will take maybe many years to come online. So that I will take. That was the reason behind putting the amendment in, and I'm very happy that the advisory committee did feel that they could support this going forward. Thank you.
All right. We have many questions which have not yet come forward for the speakers. When we get the questions, each of the two groups will have the opportunity to speak to the questions before finally giving their final words on these subjects. The questions have left the room. We have representatives from each of the three groups who are sorting questions.
Talk into the mic.
Okay, the first question, which was given to me. Okay. Is this better? Thank you. You can't always tell when you're up here. The first question that we're given and we'll have Bernard and Julie speak first, and then John and Richard, has to do with students. And the question is, which students will go to Baldwin? It looks like the plans include a large group of special needs, ELL, and METCO students.
Sure. Is there any way to pull back up the slides? Sure. I was saying if there's a way to pull back up the slides, I actually have a slide about this that might be helpful. I can start by saying that it's the thank you, Dan. It's the last slide. It has a map with circles on it. I'm sorry.
So the last slide?
Yes, that one there. Thank you. So we see from here it's a breakdown. So Baldwin School will have 450 students. Of those students, we would have 45 that are BEEP, which would be the pre-K program. We would have approximately 30 students for the RISE program, which is students with specialized disabilities, including autism. Those are currently all housed at Runkle. And I'll make note here that that in 2006, I believe was the year, we had 12 students in the RISE program. As of this minute, we have 51 students in the RISE program, and as of January 1st of next year, it's expected to increase to 54. So that's an increase from 12 to 54, and we now have less space at Runkle for those students than we did previously. And so we would have a separation, some of those students for the RISE program, the program would be divided, and some would be moved over to the Baldwin site. So then we have ELL, that would be 45 students in one of our native language programs. And then METCO, we would have a proportional number of METCO students as we do in the different schools. And so I believe it's about 20 METCO students that would be at this site. And then that would leave 300, so as you subtract out those things, as you subtract out BEEP, METCO, RISE, and materials fees, that would leave 310 students that would come from the South Brookline area that would go to the Baldwin School.
We have some questions which are addressed to specific speakers, and one of those goes to John Doggett. Can you show us on the maps where you would build on Lincoln and Lawrence?
I have, yes, if you could get the slides up. If I could come to the desk, that would be... If I can find the slides, so just bear with me. Here we go, Lawrence. Okay. Look, this is a plan that HMFH drew up as part of the, there were two choices that they had apparently originally. One is here, it's in red. I've outlined it in red on the left-hand side. It's the side facing the park. And that is an area that they felt could be developed at that time, and I would imagine that's still true. The actual development that was done was the 4 classrooms on the right-hand side. I don't have it marked there, but it's on the right-hand side of the building today. If you go there, it's a large 2-story building that they actually did expand Lawrence. So there is some capacity there, we believe, in Lawrence. And that, sorry? The map, you want to see where it is? Oh, sorry, there. So in other words, that's a satellite view of Lawrence, and there, that is that blue area. I've transposed that from the HMFH plan. You can see, actually, you can see there's a good suggestion. Thanks, Helen. On the right-hand side, there's a grey roof building. I don't have a pointer. There's a grey roof building, which is a large grey roof building. That's the addition that actually was built.
Just walk over there and point.
Oh, sure, but thank you.
Actually doesn't show up on television.
This building here is the classrooms that were added to expand Lawrence. And the advantage of that, if it's still possible, HMFH thought it was possible, and at the time, and the advantage on that side is again, The cafeteria is right down in the basement under here, and so that would be an opportunity to do, improve the cafeteria potentially if one went down a building on that site. That's what it looked like. I'm not an architect. David would have much better idea, I think, but we think that there are distinct possibilities. Now, Lincoln, if I can find it, Lincoln, yeah. There is a possibility at Lincoln. Lincoln is very tight, and it's a good question. I am not very hopeful about Lincoln, to be quite honest. I think it would be better to buy an adjacent property and expand Lincoln, frankly. I think that's the way we should do it. If we're buying properties, then make an offer to, let's have a look here. This house here, it's a modest-priced house. It's owners lived in a long time, maybe wanting to sell. Maybe we could go out here. This is a huge area, enough to take expansion in Lincoln. Sorry, yes, in Lincoln. That might be worthwhile. It's tarmac. It's just pavement with cars parked on it. That could be used potentially. But Lincoln, I agree with, is a problem. So I dealt with Lincoln and Lawrence. Was that the question? Okay, thank you.
This is a question about determining the needs. Who knows best how effective or ineffective is the space in these schools than the teachers who are teaching there now? Have we heard from them in any serious, detailed way? And doesn't this constitute hard data?
Yes, we've heard from many teachers. In fact, we have a teacher on our school building committee. Yes, we've heard from many teachers. We have one teacher who's a librarian at the Lincoln School on our school building committee, who talks in great detail of the difficulties of teaching or providing other educational services in school spaces that are really just jerry-rigged together. Matter of fact, on social media, a number of these teachers have written letters to members of town meeting, some of which are just short statements that they support Warrant Articles 3 and 4, but others go into specific details regarding the problems that they have at various schools. So we've heard a lot, and we've incorporated what we hear into our thinking and planning at the building committee.
Okay. We have a question related to a legal matter, which says, given the likely delay from litigation and just a long time in putting the Baldwin project online, how does this project respond to the civil rights complaint? Won't we need to address this sooner?
So I think that there's a lot of confusion about Westfield in particular in Article 97. And so I won't ask if people want to, we can go back to the slide. But as we talked about during the presentation, there's a distinction between the Baldwin school property and the Baldwin school playground. And it is unequivocal that the Baldwin school property is not protected by Article 97. So when we're talking about the lawsuit and we're talking about what we could be prevented from building on, and when we hear about Westfield, it's really important to pay attention and to note that when we talk about Westfield and the facts of Westfield were that they were trying to take Article 97 property, knocking down a playground and putting a school building there. That is very different from what is taking place here. Here, this is a property that's owned by the town. There is currently a school on the site. It is not protected by Article 97. Also, it's really important to note that the size of this lot is the same as the size of the lot that Lawrence School is currently built on, and that we have many more students. So when we talk about what's possible and what makes sense, this site is the same, and what we can build on is the same size as we have now at Lawrence with a larger school. And so, yes, it's entirely possible that there could be legal legal deliberation or a legal process that takes place with respect to the Article 97 property, which is the Baldwin School playground, but that wouldn't be able to stop the construction of the construction of the school. So during the construction of the school process, that would give us time to resolve any sort of litigation that's taking place with respect to the Baldwin School playground site. And so as we talk about the need and the OCR complaint, I think it's very important for us to also look at the details of that complaint and look at where our priorities in Brookline are, and whether it's important for us to address these substandard spaces, and whether it's important for us to get our students out of closets, out of the hallway, and into a real, beautiful, wonderful 21st century school building.
Can I add one?
Can I answer? Oh, go ahead.
You know, I'm sure it's normal for people to sort of get anxious and... I hope this microphone is clean. It's probably natural for people to get really anxious when they're faced with a deep-pocketed plaintiff filing a lawsuit or even threatening a lawsuit. But before we get too backed up against the wall and fearful, we have to really look at, as Julie did, what are the details of this lawsuit? Anyone can sue, but the question is it going to be successful? And with respect to the playground piece of this, which is just one piece and is really just sort of vaguely discussed in the lawsuit, the issue, as I see it, is a court going to say that public school children may not play on a playground next to their public school, a playground that has been used by public school children for decades and is currently used by children who attend private schools and local daycares? I doubt that that is a winning argument, and that is, how we need to look at this threat, acknowledging that it's going to be a hassle and it may slow us down a little bit, but we will prevail.
Richard?
This issue, as I said in my opening remarks, it shouldn't have to come to this because there are many, many reasons to be opposed to this project. But the fact of the matter is that if this project is approved, it will go into a courtroom and there will be an injunction. A lot of people have not really looked at some of the letters that have been filed on this, and I'd like to quote from a letter from September 11th that the town officials have. It's from one of the lawyers who's representing neighbors here, comparing the Baldwin playground and the playground at Lawrence, which both applied for LWCF grants in the same year in the 1970s. For the Baldwin Park, the federal project agreement said it was for the uses, purposes, and benefits specified in the project proposal, use by the Recreation Department's program for atypical and handicapped citizens, decrease noise, and screening off of commercial area and traffic noises. In the Sewell LWCF application, the town stated that the purpose of its LWCF grant was to improve the site for the general public and park recreation or conservation purposes. By contrast, the purposes, uses, and benefits of the Longwood Playground LWCF grant did not limit use of the playground. Now, why would this be? Because Lawrence was already a large school that was putting a lot of people out on the playground. Baldwin has never been bigger than a K3, so that's where your change of use comes in. So what they're saying here is that the grant funds for the Longwood Playground were intended only to provide safe and adequate tennis facilities and provide adequate recreational as well as other public improvements to the Central Village rehabilitation area, the focus of the Community Development Block Grant funds. So there's a major difference between the two grants. One of them allows school children to use it. The other one doesn't allow that change of use that amount of school children would bring. Now, if the town wanted to use the Baldwin School as it sits right now and make it a K3 again, nobody would object to that amount of children going onto the playground. In fact, it's happened before. the change of use of multiplying that by 4 or 5 or 6, that's where you get into the problem, and that's when it's going to go into a courtroom and be a change of use.
We have questions which are addressed, one to each of the two alternative perspectives. For John, what does plans mean in your amendment?
Excuse me, could you just repeat that?
The question as I have it is just what does plans
Okay.
mean?
Okay,
in your
that's a
amendment?
fair point. What does plan mean? Essentially, from my point of view, it's feasibility. It's $300,000 per school. That's what we spent on Baldwin. It's probably more than they need, I would hope, but certainly that's the amount of money that's available for 5 schools, and it would be the school committee who would decide, in my view. We made no stipulation as to the proportioning of those funds, and it may well be, for example, that Lincoln, being a really tough problem, is not going to be susceptible to this, but the money could then be split and help the other schools, but produce feasibility plans. And so what I would anticipate is that the school committee, the school department would do with the school committee would do their work, come up with plans for Heath, all those 5 schools, and varying degrees of complexity. Hopefully, small to medium-sized projects. That's what we're not looking to build all schools here. We're looking to build, adding 26,000 square feet, for example, on Heath. 26,000 square feet onto Baker, for example. Those are small to medium-sized projects that could be done in a 2 to 3 year period. Obviously, those would need funding, and the school department and the school committee would come back to town meeting to get those funded with solid plans for all of the schools. And as I say, there may be a mixed result on some of them, but at least I think where there's a will, there's a way, and I think that we can, if they come to town meeting with a reasonable set of plans, I think it's going to get funded. That just the frustration I sense out in the when I go to all these meetings is enormous, and I think that the fact that this passed last night is an indicative and a message, I think, to certainly the select board and the school committee that people are really frustrated. They want something done now, and now is not 4 to 5 or 6 years' time. Now means now, maybe we all know that plans take time, and it takes, to do the feasibility will take 6 to 12 months, and you've got a rolling problem there, and you've got 12 to maybe 24 months of building. So on the outside envelope, the larger medium projects would take up to 3 years probably, but maybe some of them can be fast-tracked. And I think we're looking for a more agile, agile, typically than we have done in the past. This may require different organization, may require more FTEs, more headcount to do that.
Thank you. We have another question for Richard Nangle. What is a first principle reason why the opinions of P15 and P13 abutters should matter in a debate that affects children across town?
Could you repeat the question?
I guess the question is, why should our opinions matter? I don't know.
No, that's not the question.
Go ahead, read the question again, if you want to. The question is, why should the opinions of the people in precinct 15 and 13, and I suspect 14, matter, right? Is that how you...
First principles, and in comparison to the needs of the entire town. That was a substance.
I have said that, well, I want to answer a loose end on my last answer, and then I'll get to that, because I've put a lot of thought into that. On the legal opinion answer, and I think I left a loose end here, and this is their legal opinion, but imagine this. This is a playground. It's used by the general public. Under the Massachusetts State Constitution, that park is controlled by the Massachusetts legislature. You may not like that. You may want it to be controlled by the town or the school committee, but it's controlled, in fact, by the Massachusetts legislature because it's Article 97. Now, let's say I have a standing soccer game at 10 o'clock in the morning on weekdays with my friends, and the kids come out for recess. That doesn't really work too well. What do? We either leave, maybe we'll play with the kids, it's all right by me, but I don't think people would like that, and I don't think that would be a good thing. And that's the difference between a playground that's for the general public and a playground that's really for kids in school. A playground for kids in school should be for kids in school. Now, to answer the other question, I have always said that if our neighborhood had a walkable population and a legitimate site, we would have absolutely no standing in being against the building of a school, nor would I be against the building of a school. I live practically across the street from the Beaver Country Day School. It's a fairly large school, and they undertook an addition a couple years ago. And during that addition, they put up modulars, which took up the athletic fields. It's a school that in many ways is like the site at Baker School. People still paid a lot of money to go there, and when they were done, they took the modulars up, they rebuilt the fields, everything was fine. We have a lot of schools in our area, but we don't have a walkable population for kids. This is a town that has always valued walkable neighborhood schools, and there's absolutely no reason why we should do this. If Baldwin School was not called the Baldwin School, if it was the DPW truck annex, or it was the library's textbook annex, or it was a place where the fire department stored equipment, and it was a surplus building in the town, no one would ever look at this building and say we should build a school here. It's only because it says the word school. It's a fine school as an 8, 10-room schoolhouse. It's a disaster with what was shown up on that screen, and it should never be done.
We have two related questions.
Can I add one thing to that?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Did you want to speak to that, Bernard?
Yes. The problem with, I think, what was just said is that it's Lawrence School, which uses the Longwood Playground as its recess area. I live near there. I go there. I used to run. Now I just walk around the field. And a lot of people use that field from the community for baseball games, at the tennis courts, and there has never been a problem with that joint use of the Lawrence or the Longwood Playground by Lawrence School. At the Baldwin School, it would be similar. There is a basketball and tennis court area, and of course, you know, anyone that's probably not where kids go for recess. I mean, I don't know, but there's no reason to believe that that playground, which doesn't have a baseball field like the Longwood Playground does, would create any problems in terms of joint use. Of course, there would be teachers and paraprofessionals out there for security reasons and just to make sure that kids don't get too rowdy. But in terms of a problem with joint use, I mean, we have too many examples in the town, Longwood Playground being one, Pierce being another, and other schools to think that this is a real issue.
Thank you. We have two related questions to Baldwin, and the more general question says, it's clear we need more space. Please explain why, therefore, it has to be at Baldwin. The second question, so are you saying that we need the Baldwin School for the children already in the system today, or are you building it to address future enrollment?
Sure. I'm sorry, I didn't hear the end of the first question. Was it?
The first question is, it's clear we need more space. Please explain why, therefore, it has to be at Baldwin. And then the second question, so are you saying that we need the Baldwin School for the children already in a system today, or are you building it to address future enrollment?
Sure. So I think the answer is the question is why at Baldwin? And I think the answer to that is that we've been at this for 10 years, and we've spent $1.7 million on studies to date, and we keep coming back to Baldwin because that's what we have. We own the property. We have not been able to successfully acquire alternative property, and we have explored sets of possibilities and knocked on doors and held meetings with private landowners, and this is where we're at. And the Baldwin School will offer the capacity that we need, and it's the capacity we need. I think this is where we have a where I fundamentally disagree with Mr. Doggett's analysis. He showed a chart and he said, this is where we are with current capacity in our schools. And so it's blue on the graph up to current capacity and then has small colors above. I disagree. That is not current capacity of our schools. Our schools are tremendously overcrowded. I went on a tour of every single school. So I've been on a tour of Coolidge Corner School as well, although that one has quite a bit of, the right amount of space for the children that are there. Our other schools do not. We do not offer things that we have an obligation to our students and an obligation to our teachers and our staff to be providing. Under our union contracts, we're required to have a teacher break room. We do not have those spaces at all of our schools. When we talk about equity, we should be talking about things like where we have our Metco offices located now. At one of the schools, at what is considered the least crowded of all of the schools, the Metco coordinator's office is in a room that used to house a toilet. The toilet was cut off, and there is a piece of wood covering where the toilet came out of the floor. This is unacceptable, and we are building this school for our students in Brookline, and we need the capacity, and we need the capacity now. And doing more study and taking time to pause will not bring that capacity on sooner.
May I speak to that? The first question is on future enrollment. I think we've already seen the current projections, which are the PSB projections, that we don't have a future enrollment problem. Now, that can change, but we don't have in the near term a future enrollment problem. The space at Baldwin, building the space at Baldwin maybe in 5 or 6 or whenever it comes, the question is, that space, how is that going to solve the problems at Lawrence, the problems at Runkle, the problems at Driscoll? Sorry, the Driscoll problems will be solved with a bit of luck with town meeting voting for that, which I'm in favor of, by the way. But in the space, how are these problems going to be addressed? We can only by adding space. That's why they're overcrowded, because they lack space. For example, Lawrence Cafeteria, I come back to that again, is overcrowded. 5 seatings they have there. And why? Because it seats 138 kids. To right-size Lawrence, to make that an uncrowded space, which is very crowded, I was there, basically would take 291 students would have to be relocated out of the 705 that are currently there and put somewhere. Where are we going to put those 291 in the next 3 years? We're not. And even with Baldwin came online, 291 would fill Baldwin up, basically, very close to it. So the problems are not the space is not being created at the right place. We believe that it has not been looked at. We've been looking at this shiny new object of having a school solve all the magic silver bullet that's going to solve all our problems. In the furthest part of town, away from where most of the problems are, which is in the North Brookline schools, that's where the capacity issues are the most present, with the exception, obviously, of the Coolidge Corner School, which is now open and giving relief, I'm sure, not only to them but to Pierce as well, I hope. So I think that overcrowding is different. Is different. Comes differently with different school problems as to whether it's closets or whether it's extra classrooms, breakout space, pods, whatever it is. It can be accommodated if we build that space. We're not building to enrollment. We're building space to solve the overcrowding problem. And we believe that shaking the tree, this amendment, basically means we need to shake that tree really hard. And maybe at the end of the day, by spring town meeting, we could come back with the answers. Yes, we could address this, this, and this, but we still need extra space that we can't get. And maybe that's going to be a fact of life, and maybe it is solved by a school later on. But I think that we haven't had that analysis.
Richard, did you want to add to that?
Just in terms of, we keep coming back to Baldwin, one definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. What I often go back to is the letter that the Precinct 16 town meeting members and some others put out very shortly before the 9th school selection process 2 years ago, in which they said Baldwin is not difficult or complicated, ignoring all of the Article 97 issues having to do with the Land Water Conservation Fund and everything else that had been brought up. Actually, I'm sorry, that was before Land Water Conservation, but it certainly involved Article 97 questions, which were going to kill that project anyway, okay? If that project had gone through and Baldwin passed 8-6 on the joint board in October of 2016, but if Baker had passed, it was supposed to break ground this past September for a 4-section school on unrestricted land. So the last people who should be saying, we need a school now, and complaining are the people who were involved in that effort to block Baker. That letter promises a campaign to defeat a referendum. So you really don't have the standing to do that because you were involved in this campaign.
I'm sorry, since those comments were directed directly at me, may I respond?
And didn't we talk about civility in the beginning? I think that really was kind of out of place.
That was hardly uncivil. It was just a fact.
So first, the letter that you're referring to was not signed by me.
I never said it was, but you were involved in it.
That is, so I think there's a lot of confusion about, first off, where I live, and you say that your neighborhood unanimously opposes this school. I live in Precinct 15. I live in a Heath Baker buffer. I have 3 children. They are 11, 8, and 4. They would likely go to the Baldwin School. I am a neighbor of this school, and there are many of us that support this school. There are many of us that support building a public school in our neighborhood for the public school children who live in the neighborhood. Now, there are people in town who do oppose having 400 additional students on a site that already has almost 800 students on the site already. And so I think that there is this tendency to smush a lot of different perspectives together in one, but I think that we need to really think about who our neighbors are and to stop trying to pit this as a Precinct 16 versus Precinct 15, and to really think about this as the students and what is best for the town and what is best for our kids. So.
Thank you.
That's a fair comment, but you're in a distinct minority in that precinct, and you could have had Baker for a song. You used to live in Precinct 16, and you didn't want it, and there's a lot of land there.
Thank you. We have several questions that relate to the various projections. So let me read through them. Listen up. The shortest one says, historically, how accurate have our projected future enrollments been? And then a question that says, do the projected numbers assume that there will be no new housing units in town beyond those that are planned today? And then, do calculations of student numbers include estimates of numbers of new families with children or childbearing age moving into new developments in progress? Not just the 40Bs, but all the ones filling up every space in North Brookline and turning single-family homes into 2 or more units.
That's a lot in one question. So I'll
These
try
are big propositions.
It is. I'll try my best to answer within 2 minutes. So the first question is, historically, how accurate are birth rates as a predictor of kindergarten enrollments? It was the question. And so...
No.
Is there a different question? That's the question I heard.
The question is, how accurate have past projections turned out to be?
Sure. So there is actually an analysis that's going around in a slide that is going around that shows that the Red Sox success rate is actually a better predictor for our kindergarten enrollments than our projections have been. And so I think that it's really important to remember that this is a tool. Enrollment projections are a tool that we can use as we're making decisions going forward. And so that's the first question. About new housing beyond those that are planned today, no, the 2018 enrollment projections do not include potential additional housing that might come online. It also doesn't, for example, as we look at the Hancock Village development, the numbers in the estimated number of students that would come out of Hancock Village is 203. We've been provided with information working with Mr. Zucker and his estimates of 1 kid per plus bedroom and 1 kid per 20. But regardless, his number, if you use his numbers, the estimate is 391 students. And so very conservative numbers have been used as we're looking at what projections might be coming in from these developments, even the known developments. So for example, if the Waldo Durgan project is built, there are two possibilities, one smaller, one larger. The numbers for the smaller proposal have been used within the enrollment projections. If in fact what's built is something larger, there would likely be more children that come from that project. And those children would likely, some of them would be attending the public schools of Brookline. That has not been included. And the third question was with respect to families of childbearing age that are in other types of converted properties and things. And the answer is that no. Are they called T district? That's what they are? Pardon me? T district? Like T conversion houses? What are those called? The T conversion houses? T6s? Those are not included in the projections either. So.
Can I just add one thing? I don't think Julie was saying that the Red Sox success projection or prediction is a better predictor than our school projections. I don't think that's what she said. And although the projections that any school district uses are going to be not a scientific tool, they are a useful tool, and we have to use the best tools that we have, adjusting them each year to make decisions with respect to not only future building projects, but also issues such as where kids will be placed in schools and any number of other issues. So.
Yes, I'd like to comment, if I may. It's a lot of questions there. Let's start with the birth rate. The birth rate in Brookline has been declining since 2012, about 22% so far, and that's something which can be monitored on a monthly basis because we got the statistics from the state office that monitors these things, and the information is very readily available. So if it was upticking at any point, you could do it on a monthly basis. You would be able to see that. Now, there is a controversy about how effective what's called the progression rate. That is, when children are born in Brookline, how many of them actually get to kindergarten? Do they move out and so forth? And that's what in that discussion, in that document produced by the public school department, they attempt to get that progression rate, and there's been some commentary on that. I think maybe Nathan Spritz, who's read a great memo on that, and Nathan postulates that that conversion rate is not basically correlated with the birth rate, or the kindergarten enrollment is not, which as a result of that is not correlated. In fact, the MGT in 2012 did correlate that. So there's some difference of opinion. I don't know whether Nathan is right or MGT, our consultant at that time, the Superintendent Bott referenced, did the study. They think it is correlated. I think we all, in our gut feel, know that there is some correlation between births in Brookline and birth going up and going down, but churn, moving in and moving out, which is not to do with the birth rate per se, is obviously a factor, and that churn comes into effect with that conversion. And I know the planning department are working on that to try and get a handle on that. Although when I did run the numbers, when I got Nathan's memo, I actually ran his numbers. We have a model. We actually duplicated the school department's model in order to make these projections and test the projections actually and figure out where the problems were. And we basically found that with the Hancock Village numbers that Julie's just mentioned, and the increased rates of student generation there, which a project would have, with new housing development, we took the 40Bs, and we put those numbers in, and we also took Nathan's suggestion of pegging the kindergarten rate, the enrollment rate, to 600, because that was, he said, well, pick a number, and 600 sounds good to me, and run that flat. We ran that into the model, and we had a flat result, i.e., that green line which you saw diving down there went down but flattened off, and still below that blue capacity level, which, Julie, it's the number in your report, in your school department's report, that says that's what the capacity is. Now, whether it's good capacity, i.e. the kinds of problems that you mentioned, but they need fixing. If there's a problem in that office with the lavatory, why hasn't it been fixed? We need to address the fixing of the problems in each of the schools, a detailed plan to do that, and then come to town meeting, and I'm sure they'll fund it. I mean, I will be not surprised. I mean, if it's hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe not, but certainly I don't think these are going to come to that fact. Let me just talk about Hancock Village very quickly. I know I'm going over my time here. Hancock Village, the overlay, which town meeting voted down, is a little unfortunate in this respect, because Mr. Zucker did actually offer and change to several of his development, or one of these buildings, to put a 55-year-old limit on it. And that actually, when we did the numbers on that, we had 60 kids coming out of Hancock Village with all of these fancy student generation rates and so on and so forth. Not hundreds, 60. That's where it dropped to. So if he goes down, builds the 40Bs, those will be larger numbers, there's no question. But I don't know if he's going to build those 40Bs. I would be at all surprised if he does a as of right build. He was when I met with him, with Neil, basically he was very interested in doing an as of right build. He needs variances. I don't know if it'll come to that and he'll build the 40Bs, maybe a combination. We don't know, and that's the challenge with those numbers. That you don't know what's going to turn up. Newton, interestingly enough, takes the position that you do not count in this. If you go to their enrollment report, basically you find that they do not count the numbers of a development until the building permit is issued. That's when they include those numbers. That's because they're so volatile.
Okay. A question related to studies. There have been at least 4 paid studies.
Like this.
Oh, louder. Sorry. This is really
You got to get up too close to the mic.
Studies. There have been at least 4 paid studies of expand in place since the original proposal from the 2009 MGT Facilities Master Plan for the schools. In the same 10 years, we've had multi-million-dollar projects to expand Runkle, Heath, Coolidge Corner School, and Lawrence. Did advisory review any of these studies or projects before voting to replace Baldwin with a study?
I guess I should take that. No, they did not. The job of the advisory committee is to listen to all the parties. Those studies are obviously available online, and it's certainly up to the school department or anybody else for that matter to bring those to the attention of the members for discussion, or the members themselves, obviously. So, in that, let me understand I'm not sure what the study's point was, but I think it was. I'm trying to answer the question, and maybe you could repeat it if I don't get it right. We're advocating studies. We're advocating plans to address problems. So in other words, we want a detailed plan for each school to show where all these deficiencies are, and Julie has cited, and Superintendent Bott has given us photographs. I mean, all of those should be fixed, and we want to see a plan that addresses all of those problems, because Baldwin is not going to address those problems.
Okay, Anyone else? If the advisory amendment moves forward, how many overrides and years will it take to expand in place Baker, Lawrence, Runkle, Pierce, etc.? Will each expand in place require a separate override?
For me, I'll take it, I guess. I don't know, Julie.
Your plan.
I'm very happy to deal with it. Basically, I feel that there are a lot of projects, small and large, could come out of an analysis of this type, of the planning feasibility of this type. So small and large projects, a lot of those can be run off the CIP if they're within a certain parameters and so forth, which wouldn't have required no overrides. And so that's one source of funds that could be used and to direct the CIP to make that a priority to solve the school problems. The second thing is, yes, overrides, there's no question in my mind. Let's take that Heath example that I showed. I mean, by the way, on this discussion about precincts and precincts pitting against the other, Precinct 13, the people I've talked to, the constituents I've talked with, would more than be happy to have the RISE program built at Heath. They would even an expansion of Heath by a section which was proposed in this original document in the summer. Would be with open arms. There's no one in Precinct 13 is objecting to that at all, as far as I know. At least they haven't come to my attention. So we basically plan to address problems. Yes, there will be overrides, I'm sure, but I would imagine what I would see happening is that they would be bundled up into sort of bite-sized chunks that we could digest easily, and maybe they are spaced. The school department, the school committee rather, decides that they will over a period of years, so then some may have a higher priority than others. And I think that there's a feeling out there that we don't prioritize. We want a big swatch of school classrooms, and if we prioritize, we can high priority spaces, second priority spaces, third priority. High priority might be done within 18 to 24 months. Lower priorities would take longer, perhaps, because just they're waiting in the line. There's only so much bandwidth to handle them. It is more complex, there's no question, but I think that it's a smart way to go in terms of understanding what the extent of the problem is and how to manage that. Certainly the financial end has to be managed like everything else, and advisory course does that and helps with that process, being the financial committee of the town. So absolutely, there will be overrides. I would hope to see them bundled, and but they won't be $100 million debt exclusion overrides. They would be in the 10 and 20 and $30 million. That's what I would hope.
Okay.
Can I chime in here? The Baldwin School project impacts the entire town. It's not a regional project. It impacts the entire town. You'll have a ripple effect with massive redistricting. And this is why, or it's one reason why, we have support to defeat this project from all over town and not just our end of town. By contrast, the Doggett Amendment deals with all of these issues in real time. This is the kind of planning that a community should be doing. And so all of the issues that have been raised about overcrowding, it's the Doggett plan will address these. Baldwin will not address any of them.
We've come to the time when we're going to ask the two groups to do concluding remarks, and we have to remind you that you're given a very short time to do this. So each pair of people gets a total of 4 minutes. So watch the timekeeper for this. And we're going to let the alternative perspectives go first. So that's John and Richard to go first, and then Julie and Bernard will wrap it up.
You can start on then, or you want to start? Sure. Let me start, and then maybe we'll play ping pong. You never know. We'll pass one to another as we. I think we coming up here, we need to change the way in which we look at our priorities. I think that the enrollment report is kind of like a wake-up call. We really have been going down the same old path of building new schools. So yes, people are very frustrated because we set the bar very high, and it's very difficult, as we know in this town, to find any space to put any kind of major. And we looked at dozens, and certainly we looked at Putteron, we looked at Lausanne, we looked everywhere. There's no question there's a problem finding that space. So for a school. So this is why I believe that we should change our priorities. We do not have an enrollment crisis. We're at the top, we're at peak student. Whether it's this year or next year, I don't know. It's hard to tell. And maybe it'll go back down and go back up again. We don't know how it's going to go. But right now, it's looked like it's cresting over the down. So that gives us we can have a breathing space. I wouldn't say very long, to be quite honest, because I would feel uncomfortable with that, certainly. But I think that we can do it in short order. There's a lot of people that want to help. I mean, putting all these slides and all these things together, there's a whole group of people that are very interested in solving these problems and helping the town do that. And I think that it's time to step back, take a deep breath, and shake that tree to look at what falls out now so that we can get that done. And I think that will certainly dampen down the real concerns that the residents of this town have about the school, the state of the schools, that basically will see no development for at all with Baldwin. We'll have another shiny school, and that'll be great for those kids, and those teachers. But in fact, for the rest of the system, with the exception of Driscoll and Pierce, hopefully, touch wood, we will not have any relief at all. In fact, quite likely, if Baldwin does try and there is this enrollment decrease, and we try and take students out, we'll have cascade redistricting from Pierce. Dave Gayshuk, a good friend of mine, who's done a lot of work in that. Many people you know of him. He's done tremendous work on where the kids come from and how it works. I haven't put his slide up tonight on this, so it's still being worked on. But basically what we see is, I think we need to take 175 kids out of Pierce, rippling down through the whole system, all the way through Runkle, Heath, and Baker, and Lincoln, coming down in order to redistribute the loads. And that's doing it mathematically on a piece of paper. And frankly, we got kids with parents who just don't want that. And rightly, they've got schedules, and they don't want to drive or have driven, bus or whatever, all over town. So I think that we need to be smarter the way we look at this problem, and that's what this amendment is advocating. And I hope it gets a good hearing at town meeting, and I would encourage everyone to vote for it, of course.
And I'll just chime in with the remaining seconds to say, a lot of this is really about equity. Equity in terms of pursuing all the options for space with the same level of interest. Why has there been no public process to discuss the spaces near Pierce, near Lincoln, Newbury College, land near Bournemouth Hospital, Hellenic College, the latter of which includes much-needed playing fields? This is out there. Our town officials aren't jumping on it. Why is it that we keep hearing Baldwin is not my first choice, but it's the only choice, when that's not true? We ask that we stand together for one equitable and really green Brookline. Please vote no on Warrant Article 3 and 4 and support the Doggett Amendment, and thank you for your time.
So we've heard a lot tonight that we need to do something sooner and faster, and therefore we should pause, we should reflect, and we should study more. And I know that Mr. Doggett is saying that this is not a plan or a proposal to do more study, but that feasibility type of thing that he mentions that we would need to do, that is in fact another study. And in order to move forward with this plan, we would need to do a feasibility study at all of these proposed locations. And then we would need to do schematic design plans for all of these proposed locations. This is a plan for more and further study, more and further delay, and it doesn't solve the problems that we have now. Now, we've heard a lot about how does building Baldwin solve the problems at Lawrence? In order to answer that, I think we need to really think and look at how how we got there, how we got to our overcrowded Lawrence. And how we got there was by adding more students. We had the same number of buildings, we had an increase in students, and we kept putting them in the buildings. That's how we got to the place that we're at. And how we solve that problem is we get students out of the buildings and we put them in a new building. We put them at Baldwin. Plopping down 4 classrooms on Lawrence site does not add capacity in the cafeteria. It merely adds additional students to Lawrence, which then continues to exacerbate all of the problems that we're having at Lawrence. We would have additional students at Lawrence, so we have additional students who are needing specialized services with no additional space for those specialized services, so we're having additional students getting specialized services in the hallway. What we need is an additional school. Now, we've heard tonight that it's up to the school department to bring studies and information that we have to the members of the advisory committee so that they can consider whether the Doggett plan is a good idea. I'm happy to do that. I can do that right now. In one of the studies that was done on February 8th, 2018, we had a plan for what it would look like to renovate Baker to a 4-section school, to do exactly what's proposed here, to right-size Baker for the number of students who are in it now. The cost of doing this plan is $97 million, and the result would be 1 classroom capacity less than we have now. So for $97 million, we can do what's proposed under one part of this plan. We also heard Mr. Doggett mention the Heath School, and how, in addition, how Heath would welcome an addition to 4-section school. We also have a study that we've already paid for that analyzes this proposal. From May or June of 2018, we see that expanding 36 classrooms, a 4-section school, as we've heard proposed tonight, would cost between $63 million and $75 million. That's just 2 prongs of the 4-prong approach that we've heard proposed tonight. And so I just, this is something new. It's something, it's presented in a new and different way. This is not a new or different idea. We have already looked at the schools that we have now. We have already looked at expand in place. We have done expand in place. It does not work. The time is now to build another school, and I ask you to support Articles 3 and 4.
I'd like to just wrap up by saying there are a lot of fears and anxieties in this community regarding schools. Legal fears, redistricting fears, Metco is a fear for some people, walkability, concerns about buses and cars on the streets, transportation and traffic issues. These fears can't be allowed to control us to the extent that they stop us from doing what we need to do to solve the problem of our enrollment situation here in Brookline. We need to take a deep breath and think through what our problems are and look at all sides of the issue and make sure that we're not being run by our fears. Thank you. Ernie only gave me 30 seconds.
Thanks to all the presenters. Thanks to everybody for coming out. We appreciate it, and we'll see a lot of you at town meeting. Thanks very much.